Well, welcome back to the Book Finisher Summit, everyone. And today we're talking about revision and editing. And I'm so excited to have Paula Judith Johnson with us. Paula is an online entrepreneur, Amazon bestselling author, and an award-winning author of steamy romance novels. She's also the hostess of the Writing Romance Mastery Summit, where you learn about writing, publishing, marketing your novels. And she is the creator of the immersive Seductive Storylines course and coaching program for romance authors. So welcome, Paula. Thanks for being here. So excited to
Well,
have you.
thank you so much for inviting me. I'm excited to be here too.
So we're going to talk about verbs, right? So we've written the novel, we've revised the novel. Now we're down to the level of the language and the line. And what do you find are the most common kind of issues that you see writers struggling with when it comes to editing at the level of the line?
Well, since we're going to talk about verbs, let's put it specifically for verbs. And there's a couple of different things. Especially when you get into the more complicated sentences, a lot of times I will find a disconnect between the verb tenses, where you might start out with a past tense and you end up in a past perfect tense, the has been or the have been.
Right.
And talking about those, that's the other thing I think I noticed quite a bit. And I noticed this even in my own writing in those first draft situations, especially with historical romance, if you think as in the past. And so you have a tendency to write the has been and the have been when what you really want for a deeper point of view is just a past tense, And of course, if you're doing contemporary in the present tense, just making sure that, you're all written in the present tense.
You're consistent all the way through. Yeah.
Yes.
But I'm so glad you said that because I think we all do this, right? Like the early draft, you just got to get that story down on paper. So I don't worry about my tenses. I don't worry about my verbs. I'm like, okay, I'll worry about all that later. So, but here we are. Eventually later comes, right? And you have to deal with it. So what if you're someone who, was not a grammar queen in high school, like just does not know how to diagram a sentence, for example? Like, do you think you can still do a good job of making sure that your verbs are nice and tight and crunchy?
Well, I think to myself, the first edit through there, just a pro writing aid or a Grammarly, just to pick out those verbs that are not in the right form. But past that, and this is where we start talking about power verbs, taking a look at some of those deeper ways of expressing something. I mean, how often can see Dick run? How often can Dick run? Is he rushing? Is he hurrying? Is he skipping?
Right.
Jogging? I mean, there's a lot of different words that you can use instead of just run.
Right. Okay.
So let's take a look at some of those commonly used or overly used verbs and start thinking about what is another way of saying that. As an example, a person that I was coaching recently had a scene in a restaurant where somebody walked in that the other person hadn't seen in a while, and that person ran to them. And my question was, how often do you see somebody actually running in a restaurant? They might hurry over or they might rush over, but they probably are not running over unless you're seeing dishes fly.
Right, right. Yes, exactly. Yeah. That's really interesting. So it's both making sure that the verb is appropriate for what it needs to do. But also when you talk about power verbs, can you give a few more examples of what a power verb would be, as opposed to like just your regular old verb?
Well, I think I did just give an example. The thing about instead of just saying somebody ran, stop and think in your mind, visualize your scene in your mind. what are they doing? Are they actually running? Are they jogging down the street? Are they rushing to someone?
Right.
And a really good thing a person can do, and it's a very easy thing to do, is just Google power verbs. Amazingly, you'll get a list of hundreds of words. And it's kind of boring to just kind of go through those and take a look at them. But yeah, I mean, it's just, let's not use those run-of-the-mill verbs that everybody uses. Everybody looks. Well, I think it's Stacy Juba who has a whole cheat sheet on what word can you
Does.
use
Yes.
other than other than look.
Great.
Do we gaze? Do we, I
Yeah.
don't know, stare? There's a lot of different words like that. So,
Right.
you know, get out your thesaurus and just take a look. I mean, most programs have those built in, will give you a good place to start. And if none of them really sound good, then just, you know, put in Google if
I
you want
feel like
to.
what you're talking about to some extent is also emotional specificity,
Yes, yes.
right?
Thank you.
Like,
Thank you for drawing that out.
right? Like really being specific about the emotions in the scene and letting your verbs reflect that. To me, that's a little bit what you're saying.
Yes, another example of a person I coached recently. Um, a lot of their dialogue tags were shouted. And it's like, how often does somebody actually shout their words? I mean, if you want to have a character who is shouting something, maybe instead of tagging that as he shouted, just put the whole sentence, because it's probably a short sentence anyway, in caps, you know, and that shouts from the page, and you don't even have to say that they are shouting.
And what do you do? What do you recommend around dialogue tags? Because I think that this is sort of a hotly debated topic, where there are writers who like asked and said, like there it's asked and said, and that's the full spectrum of what you're allowed to use as a dialogue tag. But what do you do? I feel like romance maybe opens up, it's a little more flexible with dialogue tags, but
Yeah, you make a very good point there, Rhonda. I have read various experts say the same thing you just said, that that said is so common that it is invisible. And I have read books that that's the only dialogue tag is said. And I'll tell you, after about the fourth said, I am bored with it. It is not invisible. It slaps me in the face of, okay, you said, said. And I don't think that is the only way to go. I am a firm believer in putting a dialogue tag that better expresses what is really being meant. I think it enhances it. I don't dialogue tag every bit of dialogue, but I don't hold forth that to get a deep point of view, you cannot have dialogue tags. I think you can have a deep point of view and still use them judiciously.
yeah. I think it's also interesting to think about, your point about not using a dialogue tag for everything is, often it's clear in the context. The context makes it clear who's speaking, what they're saying makes it clear. Or if you've made your characters really distinctive, then we can tell by what they're saying, how they're saying it, the tone of the language they're using, and so on, even the level of diction that they're using, the word choice, and so on. We can tell who's speaking. We can tell. So you don't
Absolutely.
necessarily always need, whether it's a said or shouted or whispered or, whatever. You don't always need that. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think one place that it is very useful to have an occasional dialogue tag is especially in the scenes where you have a lot of short back and forth. If there's anything I hate, it's getting to the second page or halfway through the second page, and then it's like, well, who said this? and then having to go back and go him, her, all the way down to figure out who said something. So throw a dialogue tag into those short, quick things every once in a while, just to keep it on track.
Yeah, and to not have your reader there confused, like, sorry, what, who's saying what now? Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about verbs when it comes to setting and yeah, setting. When we are, let's take I don't know, I'm just thinking like a beach scene or something. How are you thinking about verbs in the context of setting? Is it the same? Or
Well,
are you, do you have another way of thinking about those?
I think, and this is something that maybe I should have said at the beginning, always take a look at your to be verbs. Your to be, will be, was, were, has been, any of those to be verbs. I read a long time ago that a good rule of thumb would be for non-dialogue to not have more than 30% of the verbs as a passive to be verb. And any form of to be
That's
is
interesting.
passive.
Okay. All right.
So, when you're talking about the beach scene, as you said, to say the sand is hot is a passive way of saying that. To say the sand burned the soles of my feet is a very active way of saying that and is more powerful.
Right.
The waves crashed is better than the waves, I don't know, whatever the
We're high
waves
that
do.
day. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So those are the other ways of taking a look at whether it's scenery or any kind of description, is go back and look at every single one of those verbs and say to yourself, do I really need this to be verb in here? What is a better verb to use? And it will instantly make that prose more dynamic, more powerful.
Absolutely. I think also, there's a lot of uh folks often say, well, go through and get rid of all your adverbs, but you really can't get rid of your adverbs until you've strengthened your verb. Like the solution to not using, she ran quickly is to say she sprinted.
Exactly.
That's
Exactly.
the crispiness of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And I don't personally think that all adverbs should be eradicated, but again, using them judiciously. I like the example of sprinted instead of rushed or ran. And again, I think sometimes finding some of those words that we understand easily, but are not necessarily common in our talk, helps to make it fresh sounding.
So
And
give me so
especially,
an example. Do you think like sprinted is an example of that? Like we don't go around kind of saying, "Oh, I sprinted through the supermarket,"
exactly,
but when we see it, we understand what it means.
exactly,
Mhm.
exactly. And the person might say that, you know, I go jogging every day. So, that's a more commonly used word. But when you're reading, how often do you actually read that somebody was jogging? I mean, and I'm not talking about they're going out for their morning jog. I'm talking about he jogged across the street, or in your case, sprinted across the street. I mean, those are words that we do easily understand, but don't necessarily use in that context every day.
Yeah, and they have, they bring a different flavor to the character, to the scene, and so on. So, Paula, do you use any of the yourself? Like, what tools are you using personally to do your line editing? Are you using for writing aid, Grammarly, AutoCrit, any of those?
I use Grammarly only because that was the first one I came across and have used it. Why change if unless there's a really good reason for changing. Um, that's how I see it. Sometimes I think that there probably are good reasons for changing, but I haven't I haven't found one yet. I put things through, after I have self-edited, I put things through Grammarly. Then I send things to my editor anyway.
Okay, so you're also paying an editor to go through it line by line after you've
Yes.
done a self-edit. And why do
Yes.
you do that?
My personal opinion, coming from
Mm.
um, a family of people that worked in the newspaper business, is that you cannot edit your own work. Your eye sees, or rather, let me put it this way, your mind sees what it expects to see, not necessarily what is there. And even using Grammarly or Pro Writing Aid, any of those, it's not fail safe. The best thing to do, well, yes, you can get your computer to read it back to you. You can read it aloud yourself. But even reading it aloud yourself or having the computer read it to you is not fail safe. You're expecting to see a word as a word or a couple of words as a phrase, and you'll miss it. Giving it to somebody else, chances are that they are not going to miss it. That doesn't mean that we haven't all purchased traditionally published books and find the little typos in there, you
Sure.
know, but yeah, I just know from personal experience and from other people in my family who have been in that type of a business that you can't edit your own work. You will miss stuff
Yeah.
that
And
can.
I think, aspiring authors sometimes don't realize how much missing just a few little pieces, a few little words here and there, um, the experience the reader has with that and how irritated readers get, right? If they're reading chapter one and chapter one already has 5, 6, 10, 20 typos, you don't get a second chance. And so I would rather people do it up front than have to like unpublish your book in order to edit it properly, because you got a whole bunch of one-star reviews because
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
weren't
And it's not only that, having a second set of eyes or two or three sets of eyes, if you're using beta readers, um, gives you an opportunity for other perspectives. There have been times when my editor has said to me, this is a perfectly good sentence the way it is, and you can leave it the way it is, or a perfectly good scene or a paragraph or whatever, but have you thought of this? And it's, oh, no, I hadn't. And actually, I like that idea. And when I work with students in my seductive storylines course, a lot of times that's what I'm doing is I might spot a run-on sentence and it's like, okay, this one was really difficult. You might be able to break it into two sentences, or you might just be able to rearrange the sentence so you're not starting every sentence with he or she or I if you're doing it in first person. So that second set of eyes just helps not only with the editing, but with a different perspective sometimes too.
Oh, I love that. And that example you just gave there of that plotting rhythm, because every sentence has the same structure or every sentence begins with he or she or whatever, that's really hard to pick up on your own. It's hard to pick up. I mean, it's easier to pick up if you have your computer read it to you, or if you read it out loud, you can kind of get a sense of the plotting nature of it. But that's hard for you to pick up on your own, the rhythm of the work, I find.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's the same with run-on sentences, that we know what we mean, but does somebody else know what we mean?
Exactly, exactly. How long do you find it takes you to do a line edit on, your own self edit of one of your novels?
Well, I probably work a little bit differently from other people.
Okay.
I
You gotta
have a
tell us
tendency to I have a tendency to write one day, and before I start my next writing session, I edit. what I
Wow.
wrote the previous day.
Okay.
And so, I might get, when you take a look at how I file things in my computer, I might have chapter 1 with chapter, I kind of use like the library thing. Chapter 1 is like chapter 01.01.01, and then the next is point 01.01.02. That is my first time through. Then when I get the whole story written, then I go back through it again, and then it's chapter 1, you know
Right.
0.02 whatever.
Oh,
And
okay.
so so I can't really say that, oh, it usually takes me like 3 weeks to edit or something like that, because I'm doing it as I go. And that's probably why I am a slow writer, you
Okay.
know. Um,
Hmm.
between research and writing, it might take me 2 years to write a historical novel.
Wow.
My first one actually took me 3 years, but then that was the first time I'd written
Right.
creatively since high school, so um,
First one, I think, look, the first one always is the longest, I feel like, and we're learning as we go, and there's a lot of self-doubt. And so often the first one is the longer. But do you ever find yourself like, let's say you're working on a scene in chapter 3 and you've edited it, and then you get to, the whole book is finished and now you're not going to use that scene. Like, have you ever perfected something you didn't use later?
um, by perfecting it and not using it, do you mean
Like all the verbs are crunchy and like, and they're really tight and nice and active and
well, I really
great
like to think,
language.
I really like to think that I find those things to delete before it gets there. And again,
Okay.
a little bit different for me is my editor is uh, nice enough to edit chapter by chapter. So I finished chapter 1.
Oh,
I sent it to, I mean, I've sent her, a synopsis, and she
mhm.
can, an outline. So she pretty much knows where we're going with it. So she's not working blind. But I finished chapter 1, send it to her, finished chapter 2, send it to her, and get them
Oh, I've
back.
never heard of anybody working like that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then when it's all done, and I have done my revisions or anything, then I send her the whole dang thing, and she goes through it one last time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And how long have you been working with this particular editor?
I met her when I was working on my very first novel.
Okay. So
And
you guys
and
have
she
a long-term relationship now.
yes, and she doesn't take new clients. I'm sorry.
All right. And so, but talk to us a little bit about hiring someone like that, because I feel like this is a space where people get into trouble. Like they hire an editor, they think the editor is going to do one thing, they end up doing another thing, or they hire an editor and they're not getting what they expect. Do you have any
Yeah.
advice for people thinking about hiring an editor?
Well, both parties need to be clear on what the expectations are. And when you don't get the what you expect, it's probably because there hasn't been enough conversation about the expectations. The second thing is, I feel that anyone who's going to be hiring an editor should be able to get a sample edit of, at least 2 pages before hiring them, to make sure that what they're sending and what they're getting back is on track, because an editor should be there to help bring out your best writing, not to change your writing.
Oh, that's
And
good advice. Yes.
and the other thing is that we don't have to accept every edit suggestion. I've had suggestions from my editor at times of take this out, or I remember one particular scene I had in my second novel, and it was a contemporary scene. My heroine um, had been a fashion designer at one point and was changing her professions for various reasons. And she had driven from a coastal town in Oregon to Portland, Oregon to take a test for her new profession. And driving back, there's a particular place that she drove through, and I described it as somebody who is familiar with sewing and detail work would describe it, with the lacy edges of the yarrow plant and the French knots of red clover, things of that nature. And my editor, thought it was really kind of hokey.
Okay.
That wasn't the word she used, but she said, you
Stop that.
really, yeah, it's like, get rid of that. I loved it. I had worked on that. It was one of my darlings, and I know they always say, murder your darlings, but that one did not get murdered. It's
All
just,
right.
I felt that was true to my character.
Right. And that's so important. Like in the end, it's your story, it's your book. And it's this fine balance between being open to criticism, open to feedback, excuse me, and and learning and growing as a writer, and being like, oh no, that's a line too far. No, I'm not going to change that. So I love that you were like, hell no, I'm not going to do that. Has that happened often?
Not really. I remember in my first novel, there was a bit of history. It was a historical novel, and there was a bit of history that I found fascinating, and I wrote a chapter about it. And when I got it back, it's like, what's the purpose of this scene? And that's
Right.
fascinating history. Does
We
it
all
move? Yeah. Does it move your story forward? Well, no. Well, get rid of it. And I got rid of it. And it broke my heart to get rid of it. But you know something? I have no clue today what bit of fascinating history it was. It was,
clearly not that important in the final analysis.
in the final analysis, it was not important at all. So, that's something to keep in mind, not only how we say something, but what we're saying.
Right.
Is it important to the story? If it's not moving the story forward, then we don't need it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
and sometimes we take a look at things, well, yeah, but we kind of do need this. Well, do we need it? Is it backstory that we've stuck in because the reader needs to know that at some point? Is there a different way that we can include that without
Right.
the, oh, John, as you know, kind of dialogue?
And sometimes it's so hard to murder your darlings. Like it's hard. We wrote it, maybe we had a really good time writing it. It felt really good while we were writing it. And so we kind of, we take the feeling of it having felt really good, and we think that therefore that means it must be good and therefore should be included. But yeah, you have to listen to those other eyes. So can we
Right.
talk about the emotional experience of working with an external editor? Do you have so I confess, even when I'm working with a professional and I know is super solid, really great, I have to work with myself when I open up a manuscript and it's basically, word track changes and it's filled with red and little comment bubbles and stuff. Like it takes me, even though I know it's going to make the work stronger, I have to go deep breath, you know? How do you manage the emotional side of that? Or do you experience it, or you just like, no, that's my editing partner and it makes the book stronger?
Yeah. And I have never experienced getting a 300-page manuscript back with all these edits in it or edit suggestions in it, because I am able to work on a chapter by chapter basis. So it's not so overwhelming. Yeah, but I want to back up a little bit. You had asked about working with an editor. And I don't think I had really finished my thoughts there, because there are different types of editors or different types of edits. Yes, we have to be very clear on the first bit of what are we looking for? Are we looking for somebody to help us develop a stronger plot? Or are we looking for somebody to uh, proofread for us? I mean, like one's at the very beginning and one's at the very end, and there's other ones in between. There's the line edit, and there's anyway. So being very clear on what is their function, what are we looking for? So we need to be very clear on that. And as I had said before, I think it's very reasonable to expect a few pages to be edited so you can see what kind of feedback you're going to be getting.
Yeah.
And it's, I think, very important for us to be on the same wavelength so that we both get something wonderful out of this. I can't imagine going along, getting all this work done, getting it back, and finding out that they have suggested we take a left turn halfway through the book and have to rewrite half the book. Maybe it would be stronger to do that, but is that what we were looking for from them? Or were we looking for from them simply to look at it and say, how can we improve our verbs? How can we improve our descriptions? How can we do something of that nature without really changing the storyline at all?
I
So
think that's so important. You have to know exactly what kind of edit you're looking for and be on the same page with your editor, because I had a student who was looking for a developmental edit, and the developmental editor gave her some developmental edits suggesting how the story could be stronger, but then also gave her detailed line edits. Like, don't give me line edits on a piece of a book that I don't even know is going to make it all the way to the end, because I'm still thinking through the story. It's not helpful. But that said, I do love the line editor who will point out when something makes no sense.
right.
Here you said it was May, now it's September. It's just been 2 weeks. How does that happen? So most editors, I think, they kind of can't help themselves because they tell people, right? So they're like,
Right.
that doesn't make sense. So
Now, there's another aspect of power verbs that I would like to talk about, and that has to do with metaphors and similes.
okay.
I think a lot of times we can come up with an original metaphor or simile that supersedes any number of verbs possible. And I'm going to give you a little example. And one of my favorite ways of creating new metaphors or similes is when I'm reading a novel. If I come across something that really resonates with me, oh, that is so beautiful. I would love to be able to write a beautiful sentence like that. I use that as an example to springboard my own creativity. So, for example, going back to what is a simile and what is a metaphor, a simile will use the word typically like or as is, where a metaphor won't. An example, she is as innocent as an angel is a simile, but she is an angel is a metaphor, because we know she's not really an angel unless you're writing a ghost story. So a metaphor is using a word in exchange as a description. But as an example, I came across a sentence written by Phyllis A. Whitney in her book Emerald. And her sentence read, "High above me, the mountain stood silhouetted against dark blue silk, and a sliver of moon was pinned against the sky." I just thought that was beautiful. And so I will take a sentence that really resonates with me like that, and I will rework it in ways just to practice getting my metaphors or similes better. So, I rewrote that. The blue diamond Venus clung tenaciously to the silver crescent moon, was pinned to the black velvet sky. Oh, I guess I read that wrong. The blue diamond Venus clinging tenaciously to this silver crescent moon was pinned to the black velvet sky. I'm not copying her, but I'm using what she has written as a way to develop that verbiage, that type of descriptive language. Lisa Bingham, in her book Sweet Defiance, wrote, "The first amber fingers of dawn barely tickled the horizon." And again, that resonated with me. And so I wrote different things such as, "The fiery red fist of the setting sun slammed into the sea." I would not have thought about writing that if I hadn't read what Lisa Bingham had written. And I think we can use those types of not copycat, but ways of teaching ourselves to write better.
Yeah. I do that as well. So I take my writer's notebook and I take passages from writers I admire and I'll write them out by hand to get a sense of the rhythm and what they're doing with the sentence. Again, kind of as inspiration, not to copy them, but just to, yeah, to learn what
Yeah.
they're doing. Yeah.
And I'm glad you brought that out, Rhonda, because there is scientific proof behind it that you can copy verbatim what somebody else has written, copy it over and over and over, and it teaches your mind not how to copy that exactly, but how to get the rhythm of it and how to develop that into your own words. So that is an excellent, when we don't know what else we want to do, we don't know what we want to write, we're stuck in our writing, pull something out that really resonates and just copy it over and over, and it will help, or use it as a springboard for developing your own similes and metaphors.
Oh, absolutely. So I love this, the idea of using similes and metaphors to kind of power up our verbs as well, right? Where you're talking about the sun slamming into the sea, that's so powerful compared to, anything else you might say about a sunset. Anything else before we close up that you'd like to say about power verbs and how to make sure that when you're doing your own self edit, whether you're using another editor or not, that you've tightened the work and made it as good as it can possibly be?
I think that we pretty much covered the things that come off the top of my mind. Using those beta readers is important. Remembering that if you use 3 beta readers and each of them have one thing that they have to say and it doesn't relate to anything, pick and choose what you want. But if all 3 of them say something the same, maybe you better pay attention.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's yours to change, but they are definitely pointing out something that you got to pay attention to. This is so great. Thank you so much for this, Paula. I think this has been really helpful for folks when they're at that final stage of, the book's been written, the book's been revised, and now we're just looking to make the writing that much stronger. So thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thank you very much, Rhonda. Bye-bye.